I imagine there's no penalty for those students.
And I have a head cold. And I have a head cold. So if I sniffle or sound like a goose,
code words in the...
hello there. My name's Miranda, and I have a head cold. So if I sniffle or sound like a goose, it really cannot be avoided. But anyways, today I want to talk a little bit about a topic that I personally find really intriguing, and something that a lot of people may not think about too often. And I think especially as of late, it's not on a lot of people's minds. I'd like you to think back as far as you can to when you first learned how to read. Do you remember story time in elementary school? Your family reading bedtime stories to you all tucked into bed? The first picture book you loved? Chapter book? Have you ever taken it for granted? How a lot of us can read with ease. Some can't. Some can't focus or retain the information. Does that sound like you? This topic wormed itself into my brain a while ago, just generally speaking. Notably, a few years ago, a coworker of mine saw that I carried a book with me to read when it was slow or to read on my lunch break. She told me she hadn't read a book cover to cover since she was a kid in school. And even then, she felt like she didn't even read it all the way through. I know a good amount of people who say similar things, and it's hard for me to wrap my head around it because I've always had a book that I was kind of just in the middle of since forever. I feel like I've never stopped. I mean, sure, I've taken a few months hiatus before. Life gets in the way, schoolwork piles up, or I just lose interest. But I always find myself gravitating back to it, without even realizing it, I guess. Technology and smartphones and all that jazz, of course, I feel that addiction too. There were times where I sat and read a whole novel in a day, or could pick away at a book for hours straight. Now there's so much noise, so much to scroll and see, notifications to answer, all kinds of thoughts swirling around in my mind and poking into my consciousness that it kind of tears me away from the deep concentration I could give to a book that I'm supposed to be reading for fun. I do feel like technology has affected a lot of us in our self-discipline, our attention spans, and even it's a common thing to worry and be concerned about the youth, how they're doing in school. We kind of surmise on how they seem to be failing. A common thing people like to talk about, if you've noticed or even partaken yourself, is that kids, specifically these days, just don't seem to be reading as much as they used to. I'm putting air quotations on used to. In fact, this kind of attitude has been around since the late 1970s.
Across the nation, parents, school boards, the pupils themselves are urgently concerned over the quality of teaching and learning in schools. The decline in national test scores and the frequency of media reports on the illiteracy of high school graduates have created a national trend in education widely referred to as the Back to Basics movement. Actually, the word movement isn't a very good choice. It implies a conscious organization and a leader. The Back to Basics effort has neither. It's more of a trend. But there are enough widespread manifestations of Back to Basics to call it a very major trend. And the majority of school systems are being influenced by it.
This audio clip is from a 1978 recording. This part where the woman was speaking was actually the introduction portion of the recording, where Senator Claiborne Pell, who created the legislation in 1972 to grant financial aid to American college students, hence the Pell Grants being named after him. In this audio, he shares his views on basic education skills in American school systems and what he thought we needed to implement or change at the time.
Personally, I believe we've got to return to basics, to the 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic. Helping move us in this direction would be the availability of some sort of voluntary national test that would measure the youngsters' grasp of these 3 R's. Such a test would be nationally developed and sponsored. The problem shown by recent studies is that students today are using an absolutely primer-like vocabulary and are writing less coherent and grammatical paragraphs. The majority of youngsters have mastered the fundamentals of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, but they too flounder when it comes to applying these basic skills to everyday situations.
Does this sound familiar at all? We've implemented standardized testing. Great. It still sounds familiar. It still sounds kind of like what we're concerned about today. The vocabulary of young people, the way they apply their knowledge to real-life situations, the way they haven't retained the information they were supposed to know. Thus came standardized testing. And we're still concerned, 2026. Except now we have technology and the things of modern life that make it difficult to concentrate. And I just think this is something to think about. I don't really know what I'm trying to say specifically yet, but I thought it was interesting to hear Senator Pell talk about this in this way. And it sounds eerily familiar. These concerns seem to just be natural to us. Or maybe we haven't cracked the right code for true good education yet. I don't know.
The conclusions reached in reference to what fundamental and basic means may be helpful to your school and community in defining goals for your schools. First, reading is fundamental. Not only should each child learn to decode words in the first few years of school, he or she must be able to understand, evaluate, and think about what they have read. Communication, writing, speaking, and listening, is fundamental. Vocabulary, sentence structure, grammar, spelling, and punctuation are vital to effective communication. So is the ability to develop and refine a thought and put it into words in order that another may understand. Writing skills must receive renewed emphasis. Writing is most important not only as a tool in itself, but as a valuable aid to improving.
We have emphasized education and literacy and communication dating back to the 70s. We will always worry about the younger generations and where they fall on the educational, intellectual spectrum. So what is it that we need to do? What needs to be done? That's what I want to think about. I'm going to cite and share a clip of a conversation/interview from a different podcast. It was published by a podcast called Indoor Voices, hosted by Kathleen Collins, who is a librarian and faculty member at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. In this podcast episode, she interviews Kate Brandt, who is a professional development coordinator at the City University of New York. She specifically works in the adult literacy and high school equivalents and English as a second language programs. So in this episode, they discuss changes in adult literacy and what Kate Brandt's job is like, since she's consistently been working in this field as a teacher and then as a professional development coordinator since the 90s.
Technology to societal changes to economic, I mean, like what are the big things that jump out of you that you just in, say 1990 couldn't even imagine? I mean, you span the before and after the internet for one thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think aside from technology, which for someone like me who grew up who in college I was typing on an electric typewriter, so I watched the first word processing where the sentence magically wraps. I remember doing that my first job out of college. And of course, during the pandemic, that has been a big challenge. And for someone like me who's older, it's been really a challenge. Mm-hmm. I'm very fortunate to work with colleagues who kind of led the way. As you know, the turn to the pandemic was quite sudden. Mm-hmm. And things I'd been resisting for a long time, I was no longer able to resist. I would say that in adult literacy, I guess it's grown a bit. I haven't actually seen huge changes, to be honest. A lot of the things stay the same. Mm-hmm. I think maybe in New York City, the field has gotten a little more organized to really try to advocate. So yeah, that's all I can really say.
Yeah, well,
about
I mean,
that.
that's to have your answer be not that much has changed is very telling.
Yeah.
And interesting in and of itself.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always going to be people who need these services.
Yes.
How would that ever go away?
Yes. We're always trying to get more funding. Mm-hmm. And it's difficult. For one reason is that, we don't have, terrific data that shows people making rapid, enormous progress, because our students are the people who are, working at CVS, they're working in retail, they just have so many stresses, and they really, people don't realize that someone might not have car fare to come to class. So they just have so many challenges that, that's not going to change, and it hasn't changed.
Right.
Yeah.
And in this kind of program, I imagine there's no penalty for those students because there isn't really, this time crunch of, you have to get your degree during these few years. It's just like, we're here, come when you can. I imagine, maybe.
For a lot of adults from certain lower socioeconomic backgrounds in modern day, education and literacy is going to be on the back burner. If the country really prioritized literacy and education, shouldn't it be easier or at least a little more accessible for people? Adult learners enrolled in these CUNY programs work long, hard hours to survive and pay the bills. The fact that they chase degrees in between all of that is commendable, and lots of people need more time and resources, and they need less stress about the economic side of life in the US. Why should it be a privilege or something that requires such sacrifice to be able to get an education, to cultivate thought? So next, let's go back in time to the 1940s through the 70s, namely in the southern United States. Before President Lyndon B. Johnson passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, Black Americans were not fully granted access to vote. Because of this, a literacy campaign/project called the Citizenship School Program took place in various southern states in response to these racist literacy tests, which were required before registering to vote. These literacy tests were purposefully intended to bar illiterate and disenfranchised groups of people from voting. These groups of people were poor people who didn't own property or couldn't prove that they had a just moral character. People of color, immigrants, generally just people who had little to no access to education. These citizenship schools taught specifically African Americans to read and write, equipping them with the basic literacy skills that they needed to pass the voter registration tests and hopefully vote crooked, generally harmful politicians out of office. These schools critiqued white supremacy and taught history lessons too. They pulled from activist efforts of the past to inspire new ones. This campaign drove immense political action. Martin Luther King Jr. eventually became involved, and overall it was a catalyst that empowered the civil rights movement. This is just one example of how literacy campaigns and the sharing of knowledge between people can propagate serious change. Knowledge is power. This is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to historical literacy work and campaigns. Even across the globe, literacy is inherent to human development, communication, and connection. Being able to read, write, and think clearly for yourself, these are some of the most important tools to have in your toolkit. And I think that will always be the case. I invite you to think about this too.